Well, at the risk of drawing this wonderfully beautiful long service out even longer, a few more words to share. And the first set will come to us from a text that many of you probably read in high school or maybe even beyond, East of Eden. It'll be shared by one of our Fountain Clubbers, Nina Cahill. Sorry.
Hi. Okay, so this is one of my favorite books, and I'm not a senior or even really transitioning or anything, but I'd like to read it for you. This is at a part in the book when the main character is talking to his friend Samuel and his Chinese servant Lee about the story in Genesis about Cain and Abel. Okay, so this is Lee talking at first. Do you remember when you read us the 16 verses of the 4th chapter of Genesis and we argued about them? I do indeed, said Samuel, and that's a long time ago. 10 years nearly, said Lee. Well, the story bit deeply into me, and I went into it word for word. The more I thought about the story, the more profound it became to me. Then I compared the translations we have, and they were fairly close. There was only one place that bothered me. The King James Version says this: it is when Jehovah has asked Cain why he is angry. Jehovah says, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. It was the thou shalt that struck me, because it was a promise that Cain would conquer sin. Samuel nodded, and his children didn't do it entirely, he said. Lee sipped his coffee. Then I got a copy of the American Standard Bible. It was very new then, and it was different in this passage. It says, do thou rule over him. Now this is very different. This is not a promise, it is an order. And I began to stew about it. I wondered what the original word of the original writer had been, that these very different translations could be made. Lee, said Samuel, don't tell me you studied Hebrew. Lee said, I'm going to tell you. It seemed to me that the man who could conceive this great story would know exactly what he wanted to say, and that there would be no confusion in his statement. You say the man, said Samuel. Do you then not think this is a divine book, written by the inky finger of God? I think the mind that could think this story was a curiously divine mind. We have had such a few minds in China, too. Okay, so after this, Lee goes to San Francisco, where his family association is, which is like a bunch of these old Chinese scholars who are very wise and very interested in stories like this. I went there because in our family there are a number of ancient reverend gentlemen who are great scholars. They are thinkers in exactness. A man may spend many years pondering a sentence of the scholar you call Confucius. I thought there might be experts in meaning who could advise me. I respectfully submitted my problem to one of these sages, read him the story, and told him what I understood from it. The next night, 4 of them met and called me in. We discussed the story all night long. I guess it's funny, he said. I know I wouldn't dare tell it to many people. Can you imagine 4 old gentlemen, the youngest is over 90 now, taking on the study of Hebrew? They engaged a learned rabbi. They took to the study as though they were children. Exercise books, grammar, vocabulary, simple sentences. You should see Hebrew written in Chinese ink with a brush. After 2 years, we felt that we could approach your 16 verses of the 4th chapter of Genesis. My old gentleman felt that these words were very important too, thou shalt and do thou. And this was the gold from our mining, thou mayest rule over sin. The old gentleman smiled and nodded and felt the years were well spent. It brought them out of their Chinese shells too, and right now they're studying Greek. Samuel said, it's a fantastic story, and I've tried to follow, and maybe I've missed somewhere. Why is this word so important? Don't you see, cried Lee, the American Standard Translation orders men to triumph over sin, and you can call sin ignorance. The King James translation makes a promise in thou shalt, meaning that men will surely triumph over sin. But the Hebrew word, the word timshel, thou mayest, that gives a choice. It might be the most important word in the world. That says the way is open, that throws it right back on a man. For if thou mayest, it is also true that thou mayest not. Don't you see? Yes, I see, said Samuel, I do see. But you do not believe this is divine law. Why do you feel its importance? "Ah," said Lee, "I've wanted to tell you this for a long time. I even anticipated your questions, and I am well prepared. Any writing which has influenced the thinking and the lives of innumerable people is important. Now there are millions in their churches who feel the orders 'Do thou,' and throw their weight into obedience. And there are millions more who feel predestination and 'Thou shalt.' Nothing they may do can interfere with what will be. But 'Thou mayest,' why, that makes a man great. That gives him stature with the gods. For in his weakness and his filth and his murder of his brother, he still has the great choice. He can choose his course and fight it through and win." Lee's voice was a chant of triumph. Adam said, "Do you believe that, Lee?" "Yes, I do. Yes, I do. It is out of laziness, out of weakness, to throw oneself into the lap of deity, saying, 'I couldn't help it, the way was set.' But think of the glory of the choice. That makes a man a man. A cat has no choice. A bee must make honey. There's no godliness there. And do you know, those old gentlemen who are sliding gently down to death are too interested to die now? These old men believe a true story, and they know a true story when they hear it. They are critics of truth. They know that these 16 verses are a history of mankind in any age or culture or race. They do not believe a man writes 15 3/4 verses of truth and tells a lie with one verb. Confucius tells men how they should live to have good and successful lives. But this is a ladder to climb to the stars. This is not theology. I have no bent toward gods, but I have a new love for that glittering instrument, the human soul. It is a lovely and unique thing in the universe. It is always attacked and never destroyed, because thou mayest."
So a command, a promise, and a choice. Which one lies before you today? This notion that this is a community, a community garden, if you will, and that each morning that you step in here, each morning you wake up and look out of your bed, there is a garden around you. Is that garden full of promises? Is that garden full of commands? Or is it full of choices? How will you choose to view your world? You've heard the statements and the voices of some of the youth of this church as to how they will garden. And now the challenge is yours. A command, a promise, and a choice. Whichever you see and whichever calls to you, answer wisely and answer well.